So Penn State, they've got to figure out who their new defensive coordinator is going to be. But let me tell you, they got some great news on this day, as both running backs are going to be returning, Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allar. And it's interesting is a lot of people had Singleton as a top 5 back in this class. Kaytron Allar as more of a later round pick. But these guys this year ran for over 2,200 yards, 20 touchdowns. They both ranked 10th and 11th respectively all time at Penn State. And if they stay healthy next year, they could finish as the number 1 and number 2 rushers in program history. So I'm sure NIL goes a long way in getting guys back to school. But that had to have been part of this discussion for them, saying, man, that'd be pretty cool if we could finish as the top 2 in program history. They're joining Drew Allar, Zane Durant. So Allar, of course, the quarterback, Zane Durant, D tackle, as other guys who are announcing that they're going to be back for another year. So they're really going all in from the roster point of view there.
Yeah, we'll watch Dennis Sutton. He, to me, was one of the best players on the field in that semifinal. I mean, he was outstanding. Does he want to come back and sort of be the star of the show with Abdul moving on? So we'll see how that situation sorts out. But Penn State's going to be a preseason favorite because of what they bring back in the backfield, quarterback and running back. The decision, to me, it kind of reminded me of Nick Chubb and Sony Michel back at Georgia, where you kind of said, all right, these are 2 great running backs. Running back is a position where you get injured. Of course, we saw that with Nick Chubb, right? Where he had injuries, and Sony Michel too. So it's a fragile position. Not fragile is the wrong word, but it's just you take such a beating that your body only has so many carries, right? So usually when guys have a chance to go pro at that particular position, more than any other, they will go pro. So the fact that you have not just 1, but 2 premier 1,000+ yard backs coming back at the same time. The only thing I can think of is that Chubb and Sony Michel team for Georgia. That was very much a strong culture there at Georgia. Those guys really personified it, and that team ended up winning a lot of ball games. Say what you will about James Franklin. I'm a fan of James Franklin. Obviously, that's a source of a lot of debate in the college football world, just where he is in the pecking order, if he can get over the hump. I won't get into all that. All I'll say is this. You have to have a pretty good culture if you have a guy like Drew Allar coming back, number 1. I know he didn't have a great playoff game, but you talk about the NFL draft, he probably at worst is 3rd in this class if he goes pro, even with the very, very tough game against Notre Dame. Okay, beyond that, these 2, right, on offense, it's getting these guys to come back says a lot about what James Franklin is building from a culture standpoint. The fact that people, maybe not coaches, assistant coaches, but certainly players want to be a part of this team and believe in this team's ability to go win a national championship, a Big Ten championship here in the year 2025.
And that Sony Michel Chubb, those decisions were pre-NIL, so I'm sure those guys were playing for free.
Well, I sense the sarcasm in your voice, but I'll tell you this, they definitely were playing for a lot less, right? So, that's something we got to talk about with this decision. Or a Carson Beck coming back to Miami, right? Some of these decisions that guys have an opportunity to go pro and still decide to come back and play. It's a new world with not only NIL, but now you have the rev share, right? So the money's going up. The numbers you're hearing for quarterback are all far in excess of what Cam Ward made last year as the premier quarterback on the market. So people are getting paid more. If you're Penn State, we've talked so much about, and it's going to be a theme throughout the offseason, about Penn State needing to upgrade at wide receiver. You saw the game against Notre Dame. The receivers gave you absolutely zero production. It's been well publicized, well documented. So they've improved that position. You go to Troy, get Devontae Ross, highly productive player. Kyron Hudson, there's kind of a weird situation at wide receiver at USC. A lot of guys moving on, but he had a spectacular catch early in the season, probably the catch of the year right away, and he's got a lot of talent. I'm not saying he and Ross are the absolute answer to match what Ohio State does, but you'll get better production out of those guys than what you have returning. So much focus on wide receiver, but the running back position would have had a ton of production to replace if these guys were to go pro. And I'm not sure, looking at the roster for Penn State, if they had the combination of size and athleticism and experience on hand to replace these guys. So the fact that they're coming back is an incredible boost and puts less pressure on the passing game with Drew Allar and these receivers to make that leap. You still need them to make that leap. That's how you're going to beat a Notre Dame and Ohio State. But there's not as much pressure because you're not also at the same time replacing a running game, which I'm looking at the numbers against FBS competition. You're talking about 16th nationally in yards per game rushing, and that's without a quarterback that runs. You look at the top 16 rushing teams, most of them have running quarterbacks to boost that total. To have a passing quarterback and still be 16th nationally in rushing, that means you got some special backs, and Penn State certainly does, not only this year, but in 2025.